Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Brian Smith, and I work with Fan Nation on Sports Illustrated's Greater Network and cover UCF and several other schools, mostly recruiting, but I do dabble quite a bit with just the overall look at college football. Recruiting gives me a pretty good insight as to what some of these teams have in terms of their roster. And with that, I have 5 teams, as you can see, scrolling across here on the bottom that I want to talk about based on week 5. I'm going to pull up a few stats. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of the teams just from seeing them play, some of the things I had concerns with, just stats, etc. It's a combination. As most people know, if you're watching any form of a podcast or video on YouTube or anything else, college football is very opinionated because you're dealing with players that, quite frankly, are not yet good enough to be pros. Most won't. And there's a lot of volatility. So with that, let's jump in with the first team on the list, Alabama, who is currently ranked number 1 and had Bryce Young out of the lineup. Now, I've been blessed to have met Bryce, and he's a really good dude and somebody I could see why players around him would want to navigate to. Met him at Elite 11 last summer. I didn't know anything about him other than watching him play till then. He's down to earth and everything else. So seeing him come out and support Jalen Milroe because he was the starter the way he did, being happy for him, everything he did, I think will help Alabama long term. Just put that in the back of your mind. He's a team player and wants to see everybody succeed. That is so important in today's college football world. That's not always the case, however, for a quarterback that goes out of the lineup when another guy comes in. So just something to think about. But 2 other points about Alabama, and then a point about A&M as well. They surprised me, and they deserve a little kudos too. But 2 points about Alabama. Milroe is not ready as a passer. That's not any surprise. That's not the point, though. Their receivers are getting better. That's absolutely vital. And to that point, I'm going to pull up the screen here and just kind of play with the stats a little bit. If you look at Alabama and you look at the receiving totals, notice like Burton, Brooks, Gibbs, the big tight end, they used a variety of guys, and it certainly wasn't anything spectacular. But the most important thing from it is he was willing to throw to the backs, the tight ends, etc. He wanted to try. Alabama's receiving room is not as deep as it's been in other years. That being stated, if you look at that list, what's also important? What's right above the receiving totals? Everybody knew they needed to run the football, and this is point 2. Despite Milroe being, quite honestly, not very good at throwing the ball last night, not being in sync, which is typical of a first-time starter, they came out and just ran over Texas A&M. That shocked me, and I'm going to guess probably shocked A&M. A&M is recruited as well as anybody on defense over the last 3-4 years, Alabama, Georgia included. So they come out, average 5.6 per carry. Well, you could say, oh, Milroe had 83 of those. Okay, that's fine. Take away the 83, and it's still 205 yards. I mean, his average was actually lower than the total for some of the other guys. Now, Gibbs is a total dude. He averaged 7.3 yards against the Aggies. But here's the overall point. They couldn't run the ball very well against Texas early in the year. And I think Texas, because of the injury, and they almost beat Alabama, and they probably would have if the mullet would have played the whole game, as people on Fox are calling him and around the country, and even some of my buddies. But if you really look at what Alabama needed, it was to find a way to get the running game going. I didn't think that was going to happen when everybody knew you had to run because you had an inexperienced quarterback in because they bring up everybody. I thought the Aggies would hold them to 150 yards rushing, maybe less. I wasn't even close. So what we saw here is just an incredible transformation. Why, I have no idea, but a lot of times we don't understand. Again, it's college football. It's volatile. The other part of that, of course, is Saban, and he's hired a tremendous staff. So Alabama has gotten it done, and that is vital. Now, switching gears, I don't think anybody's going to beat Alabama now that they figured out the running game, barring Bryce getting hurt in the middle of a game again. Flat out calling it, they're going to win the national title. But that's not exactly earth-shattering news to make that statement. if you go down a little further and you just look at the list of teams, the other interesting box score for me is the Clemson game. I thought that Boston College would stick around. For them just to score 3, and I know they're having a tough year with their offensive line and stuff, but for them to just score 3 freaking points. Phil Yurkovich averaged 4.7 yards per pass. I remember just a moment ago I made mention of Alabama winning the title. This could be the team that gives them fits. They slow down the running game to the point where, again, BC's line is not that good. 34 yards on 30 carries, a couple of those are sacks. But if you hold a team under 50 yards that wants to be physical, like BC always does, your defensive front is real. I know that everybody is aware of Clemson's talent, but now it's a little more cohesive. They struggled mightily against Wake Forest, gave up 45. There's no way around it. That's what they gave up. It is fact. But that's a really unique quarterback, and nobody else runs that system on planet Earth. They're not going to see it again. Unless somebody is able to show a dual threat quarterback, which Georgia and Alabama have guys who move around and run, but they're not running a lot of read option and pure sprinters, I don't think that there's going to be many teams that give Clemson problems. They'll play Notre Dame, but I'll get to that in a minute. But other than them, they already beat NC State. Unless Notre Dame beats them, Clemson's schedule is pretty weak. And I know South Carolina's gotten better, but they're not beating Clemson. So how are they not going to end up in the playoff? And I haven't even got to the offense. There's some good news there too. But how are they not going to end up in the playoff? The only way is injury. Now, Cade Klubnik could come in for DJ. I think he's one of those rare freshmen that could get him over the hump in some games. I don't think they're going to win a title with him. But their defense is good enough. They held BC to 254 yards of offense. That's just ridiculous. I don't know the status. I didn't watch the game. I don't know the status of their corners, but they had some guys beat up. But apparently either they figured it out and got back on the field, or the guys that came in for them, both of which are like freshmen, sophomores, have risen to the occasion. Anybody playing Clemson, good luck. Real quick on DJ, I still have my doubts about him, but they're running the ball somewhat effectively. In fact, DJ was their leading rusher yesterday, 12 carries for 69 yards, including a 40-yarder. Hey, that's not bad. And he was 18 of 31 for 220. That's okay. Again, BC's a physical team, etc. I'm not surprised they struggled at least a little bit to get the points. They had to slowly grind it out, but that's not too bad. The other part about Clemson is I still don't know. Again, Notre Dame's the only team that they got coming up that I'm really worried about, and that's iffy. But is that going to hurt them when they get to the playoff because their schedule is a little goofy? It hasn't in years past, but they're not playing the same kind of schedule as some other teams. Georgia, I just wanted to bring up just how dominant they were. I know Ashford is learning. He's a kid that tries to throw a 100-mile fastball on every pass. But if you look at their stats beyond Ashford, and again, he's just a great athlete playing quarterback right now. That's just reality. I'm not picking on the kid. They held an Auburn team that, once again, like Clemson, like BC, some of these other teams want to be physical. They held them to 93 yards on the ground. And that includes a 17-yard run from Ashford on a scramble. I don't think many teams are going to be able to run the ball on Georgia. Not shocking. But with their experience now in the secondary by midseason and the young players, they're good to go. And, of course, they're just loaded in talent. You're in trouble. And then on the other side, if you look at the running game for the Dogs, 292, 7.5 per tote, 6 touchdowns. They just decided they were just going to bludgeon Auburn, and they did so. Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia, barring something unforeseen, going to the playoff is pretty likely. The Ohio State, Michigan winner, obviously, like most years, has a chance at the playoff, and that's not going to change. This is a very boring college football season based on that. The two possible flies in the ointment are the other two teams I'm going to bring up. And as I brought up, this is so funny. Clemson, just a minute ago, Notre Dame's not even ranked right now. And they shouldn't be. They lost 2 games early in the year and trying to figure it out, and they looked absolutely terrible. But if you really look at – I'm trying to find Notre Dame here. If you really look at it, teams, again, it's volatile. They change so drastically. Here's the box score from Notre Dame. Notre Dame was dominating BYU, and they're up 25-6, and then they gave up 2 quick strike plays, one of which for a touchdown, another one set them up. And they almost lost to BYU while they had dominated the game. They controlled the ball something like 35 minutes to 17 or something. I forget what it was. It just completely dominated and did what they wanted. But then they had some volatile problems. Can Clemson get beat by Notre Dame? I'd say it's about a 30% chance, give or take. But let's look at a couple of the numbers and why I lean heavily to Clemson. And they're the only team amongst the ones I've mentioned so far that I even give any real chance of not making the playoff. Because Alabama plays Georgia, and they're both undefeated. The winner's going is the number 1 seed. The loser will be the 2 or 3 seed. They're going. They're both going. Notre Dame has a chance because they can run the ball pretty well. They had 234 against BYU. But their front is not quite like Clemson's. I expect Notre Dame to average about 3 yards a carry against Clemson, and that's not going to get it done unless you've got a big-time quarterback. And while Drew Pine is very accurate, that's not in question. His lack of height and his just somewhat decent mobility by today's standards of college football athlete at the quarterback position. If you look at these numbers, the running game for Notre Dame was solid, but they just rely too much on Michael Mayer. And Jaden Thomas came up big for him last night. That's great, but they don't find ways to get the ball to Lorenzo Styles enough. Braden Lindsey is one of the fastest guys in college football, and he's not what he needs to be a threat. So that's why I think Clemson is kind of the fly in the ointment for the playoff game. You can't really grade them unless Notre Dame improves a lot. And that's, assuming Clemson beats, and I think they'll beat them either way, but Notre Dame needs to improve for Clemson to really have a signature win because NC State's good. They're not great. But again, it's hard to leave a Power 5 ACC team undefeated out of it. And unless Notre Dame beats them, Clemson's going. So that's the main reason I wanted to show Notre Dame. Notre Dame to me is an 8-4, 9-3 team. They're pretty good. They can run the ball, and their defense is solid most of the time, but they do have a lot of hiccups. So unless this team gets really rolling, Clemson's going back to the playoff. So again, injury being key. The other one, and this is just me being contrarian in general, I don't see how anybody can really argue that USC is a year away. And everybody wants to talk about Lincoln Riley and everything. And I've said this a million times before he got to USC, before the rumors started, etc. I do not trust his offense because the offense is only 1/3 of the game. Here's my point, but it's two-sided here because they could change. Just like I said, volatility is a big part of college football. He's very pass happy historically, but their running game is better than most give it credit for, sometimes myself included. The game last night that transferred from Oregon against Washington State, Travis Dye, 149 yards. I'll take that every time. They did a nice job up front. O-line has been an Achilles heel for the Trojans for quite some time. They've improved. Good for them. They needed to desperately. But with that, I'm shocked at the other part. Caleb Williams was only 15 of 29. That's surprising. He's a tremendous football player. He's probably the most talented kid in the country, physically overall. But that's not going to get it done. That's like 52%. Mario Williams went off, but he had a 38-yarder, 4 catches, 82 yards. Jordan Addison only had 3 receptions for 37. If Washington State is giving them problems, what's the deal? So maybe they figure this out, maybe they don't, but they're a little bit wishy-washy. The reason I bring them up with all the other things that I said, if they go undefeated, they cause a problem for teams. They play Notre Dame last. That's the other thing. Notre Dame's tied into Clemson and USC, who are battling for like that 3rd, 4th spot, both of them. They both have to play the Irish. Notre Dame goes to USC. They host Clemson. I don't know, other than Oregon, if anybody is going to give USC a pure talent problem, but then there's also Utah, and now it looks like UCLA. You got to give them credit. They beat Utah yesterday. I'm not sure I'm convinced, but looking at these numbers for USC, their defense has improved some too. I know Washington State's not on the same level as USC talent-wise. I'm not kidding myself. But if they can get past Utah and maybe, they win the Pac-12, could they, if they beat Notre Dame, especially if they beat Notre Dame like 31-13 or something convincingly, could they possibly jump? Could they possibly jump somebody else and get in the playoff? I think it's a really interesting point. There's no guarantee to it, but the college football playoff race is goofy this year because there is always a handful of favorites in Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson and Ohio State, kind of that group right there that, barring an injury, they all have experienced quarterbacks. And when those teams who have more talent than their other schools to begin with have more talent at quarterback too, it's almost impossible for them to lose. Well, now USC could be the one that looks out and finds a way. Maybe they if they go undefeated, just like my point with Clemson, how do you leave a Power 5 undefeated team out? If they have both beaten Notre Dame, Clemson could say, well, we beat them on the road and we beat NC State. Who would the second win for USC be? Well, it'd be Utah more than likely. Maybe it's UCLA as well. That's obviously their crosstown Los Angeles rival. To do that, it would be intriguing because we at least need some kind of intrigue with who makes the Final Four in the playoff. Something. And maybe USC gets beat by Notre Dame or UCLA or both, and all of this is moot. I don't know. I'm just being a speculative person here. Could they get into play? Could they beat somebody? I think they could, but I also think they are the most volatile team ranked in the top 20, not just the top 10 or top 15, the top 20, because based on this, and again, I'm not picking on Washington State, they are not even remotely the second best team the Trojans are going to play in the conference. You got Utah, UCLA, Oregon, all better. They struggled with Oregon State as well. Arizona State has some moments. Arizona's improved. Everybody's going to beat Colorado. That's nothing surprising. But what can they do to, quote unquote, get over the hump here? They're going to have to, I can't believe I'm saying this, USC needs to throw the ball better. That's like sacrilege to say that about a Lincoln Riley offense. But, hey, up there on that screen, it says 15 out of 29. Can they beat Clemson or Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama with Caleb playing at that level? No. Not even close. He's a tremendous football player, but right now he's not completely in sync. 6.5 yards per pass. 2 touchdowns is nice, but his QBR is 64.6. Those are not numbers that are going to get them over the top. So anyway, just to kind of go into the final point here, college football has been boring this year leading in like it has been in the last decade for the most part. The talent gap is pretty wide. But every other year, generically speaking, the teams with the most talent tend to have an experienced quarterback. And that's one of these, right now is one of those seasons. So USC or somebody else, could be Penn State. Penn State's got the big game against Michigan. Somebody else needs to step up and win against one of these other schools. I'm not saying I'm going to predict that. I sure as hell wouldn't advise anybody to bet on that. I don't even know where the Michigan-Penn State game is. I'm taking Michigan. That'll put you in perspective. I think they've earned that. They played well, and I really respect J.J. McCarthy as a quarterback. But Penn State's at least going to be in the game. They've been volatile with turnovers, which gives me nerves about picking them to do anything in a big game. But there's the chance that somebody can knock off one of these teams. If we have 4 or 5 undefeated teams, there's some coolness to that about one of them can't make the playoff. That'd be the only thing about it. But it would also show the difference in talent, especially with the portal. I think USC had over 20 kids transfer and how quickly you can build around. There's some other little side points. But those are the 5 teams that I think are the most influential amongst college football going into the playoff. Notre Dame, not because they have a chance, but they play two teams that are right on the cusp of making it. It's just ironic. But the other three, I mean, Alabama's not going to, maybe Ole Miss, possibly. I doubt it. I don't think they've got enough defense to, if Bryce is healthy at least, to beat Alabama, and that's been the case for years. Same thing with Georgia. If Ole Miss did get by Alabama, could they turn around and also beat Georgia in the SEC title game? I don't think so. And there's no room to definitely say Ole Miss would have the ability to run the SEC West in general. It's just a very difficult lead. It's the most difficult bracket in college athletics, quite possibly. So, again, Alabama's going to make it. Georgia's going to make it. Clemson's going to make it. Ohio State or Michigan. It's one of the two. Probably Ohio State. If I was to guess, this year the game will be in Columbus. And finally, USC could be the fly in the ointment to all that. Would be some fun. But can we get somebody to step up outside of the normal group, that not just because somebody that's a group of five or whatever is screaming we need a chance, but has the physical talent to just lay it on the line on a piece of paper and say they should go out there and compete with? Could somebody step up? That would be my wish for this college football season. There isn't enough turmoil at the very top. It's just all like numbers like 6, 7 right in through there through 25. That is just, it's just a spin cycle. But the very top, not so much. So college football is status quo, and I'm ready for some change. Everybody be good.